Good day, class. Welcome to your lecture on Victor Turner's symbolic anthropology and its relevance for our interpretation of myth and religion, as well as Chicana theorist Gloria Anzaldúa, and how myth, liminality, and shamanism inform her work. These two figures are connected insofar as Anzaldúa occasionally expresses a debt to Turner's symbolic anthropology, especially as regards his ideas on myth, ritual, and performance, and liminality, liminoid distinction. So let's start with Turner. He spent most of his career as a professor at the University of Chicago. His wife, Edith Turner, was also a prominent and significant anthropologist. Turner's work is diverse, but he is most famous for his exploration and application of Arnold van Gennep's theory of rites of passage. We've already encountered the rite of passage concept many times in the course. Probably the first thing that springs into everyone's mind on this topic is Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. Turner is interested in rites of passage in a broader, more anthropological sense. The life of the individual in society is full of rites of passage, and they always involve a preliminal phase or separation, a liminal phase, transition, and a postliminal phase, reincorporation. Turner's use of Van Gennep's rite of passage concept is pretty complicated but worth investigating closely. Turner sees rites of passage as part of a more general ritual process. It is mythology that, as a rule, provides the script for rituals. Rituals deal with seasonal and cyclical events, such as the ritual or mythic festive calendar, as well as contingent events, life crisis ceremonies, birth, puberty, marriage, death, as well as rituals of affliction, placating or exorcising troublesome forces in society. Rituals often have an initiatory dimension involving a neophyte who is learning to undergo transformation in the ritual, and an instructor. Whenever we look at rituals anthropologically, it is important to distinguish three perspectives: the exegetic, insider-participant perspective, meaning the ritual as explained by those who undergo it; the operational, outsider or anthropologist perspective, documenting what has been done; and the positional perspective, how does it fit in with other symbols of the society. Even in postmodern society, our lives are full of rituals: baby showers, birthdays, puberty, prom night, high school graduation, college graduation, marriage, divorce, life accomplishment ceremonies, retirement, death or funerary ritual, etc. All such rituals or rites of passage involve a transition from one condition or fixed state in the social structure to another. During the ritual itself, or the margin or limen, the liminal period, the state of the ritual subject is ambiguous, betwixt and between an earlier social identity and a later one. In the ritual itself and afterwards through aggregation, the passage to the new social condition is consummated. In the preliminal stage, the previous social identity dies a symbolic death. You are no longer a child, or you are no longer a bachelor. Undergoes a liminal test. You're going to pass or you're going to fail, like a dissertation defense. And enters into a postliminal phase of incorporation, new birth. You've done it, you're married, or now you're a doctor of something. In traditional as opposed to modern and postmodern societies, these structures involved in any given rite of passage are very often even more intense and detailed. The secluded youth undergoing ritual initiation into adulthood and the myths and traditions of their clan are often completely separated from the rest of society for a period, structurally dead and exposed to various ordeals. The neophyte has nothing: no status, property, insignia, clothing, rank, kinship, position, nothing to demarcate them structurally. Ritual subjects are the very prototype of sacred poverty, or what King Lear calls naked, unaccommodated humanity. Between neophytes, instructors, and society at large, there exists a set of relations which is experienced by the neophyte as communitas, Latin for community. The shared suffering and indignities inflicted during the ritual make those who go through it feel connected. Emergence from the liminal situation also marks distinction and graduation, a change in social status, and the phase of reincorporation. Turner thus understands rites of passage and initiatory rituals in terms of a dialectic that moves between structure, normal society, and communitas, or anti-structure, the liminal phase. The conscious or supraliminal individual is what is produced in their new social status by the ritual ordeal, through having undergone, surmounted, and incorporated the social forces of the unconscious. The book shows this 1st century CE fresco from the Villa of the Mysteries in Pompeii, where the initiates, young women at the threshold of adulthood, are whipped as part of the ceremony, thus experience the temporary loss of status associated with the ritual. Turner goes on to investigate how liminality, ritual, and play transform between traditional and modern societies. While rituals tend to be considered as work by traditional societies, there's also an element of play. In tribal societies, children and adults play games in non-ritual leisure contexts. But the serious games which involve the play of ideas and the manufacture of religiously important symbolic forms are often reserved for authentically liminal places and times. Liminal monsters and dragons, riddles and challenges encourage the free play of the ritual subject. Liminality is often the scene for immolative action, which demonstrates, usually subverbally, this innovative freedom of play. The textbook gives the example of the annual Burning Man festival in the Nevada desert, where a large statue, the man, is built and burnt, immolated, along with art created during the festival. Turner comments, as Aphrodite was born from seafoam, symbolic types are generated from liminality. The play of liminality is what performs and creates new myths. According to Turner, in traditional societies, participants expect and receive the whole of the community in their rituals. No one is exempt from ritual duty, just as no one is exempt from economic, legal, or political duty. There's less of a distinction between work and play in tribal and agrarian ritual and myth. In post-industrial societies, however, there is a stronger distinction between work and play. Technological development and other factors brought more leisure into the free time of industrial cultures. So how does liminality change in modern societies as opposed to traditional ones? Basically, instead of having genuine liminal rituals, modern societies have liminoid ones, based on leisure and free choice. Not everyone is forced to participate in the rituals of a post-industrial society, so these societies have less of a liminal period in their rites of passage. Their rites of passage are better characterized as liminoid, by which Turner means resembling the liminal or liminal-like. According to Turner, liminoid phenomena are not cyclical, but continuously generated through leisure activities. They are plural, fragmentary, and experiential in character. They tend to be more idiosyncratic and quirky, their symbols being closer to the personal and the psychological than to the objective social pole, and they go further in being social critiques or even revolutionary manifestos, and are more like a commodity than an elite loyalty bound up by membership to a particular group. So the key difference in our relationship to liminality between traditional and modern societies is that of obligation versus optation. A key feature of ritual in traditional societies is that it is not optional. Sooner or later, no one is exempt from their ritual duty. However, in modern industrial and post-industrial societies, except in certain fringes, rituals tend to be symbolic genres associated with leisure, entertainment, or instruction, and are often fully optional, or permitted according to free choice, individual license. Cultural products of leisure, such as theater, poetry, novels, ballet, film, sports, music, art, pop, etc., become marketable commodities, substituting for traditional religious initiations. Often these rituals and myths of modern society resemble traditional ones, but there is almost always an out. For Turner, our rituals and myths are almost all play and choice or entertainment, rarely a matter of deep, profound, and existential seriousness or even dread. Now, this is not an absolute distinction, Turner notes, but rather a trend. Ancient societies also experienced liminoid cultural genres, and the liminal or liminoid-like is secreted as a seed by the liminal itself. No society can do without both the liminal and the liminoid. Distinction comes down to the performative act. We work at the liminal, but we play with the liminoid. Turner also recognizes a class of people in both ancient and modern societies who he calls liminal personae, or threshold people. That is, people who elude or slip through the network of classification that normally locates states and positions in a cultural space. Every member of a society generally undergoes liminal phases, but without becoming liminal personae as such. In ancient societies, it is the nearness of the shaman, the diviner, the medium, or the priest to liminality as such, to quote, death, being in the womb, invisibility, darkness, bisexuality, the wilderness, and the eclipse of the sun and the moon that qualifies him as functionally liminal for the society. That is liminal in regards to most all of the societies, generally agreed upon structures and sense of the real. The shaman-like figure is generally a trickster between the worlds of social structure and the world of transgression or boundary dissolution implied by the ritual itself. The trickster is part of society but functions at its limits. He or she lives between nature and culture and is able to unmask established norms of the society. Modern society as well sometimes promotes liminal personae or trickster figures. This is where we can transition from Turner's understanding of the liminal-liminoid distinction into Anzaldúa's. We have already read some of the work of one shaman trickster-like figure in modern society, that is Martin Prichtel, And now we'll read the work of another, Gloria Anzaldúa. Interestingly, Prechtel's initiation into and adoption by a Mayan village culture and its shaman constituted a prolonged liminal phase. When Prechtel lost that world and returned to the more liminoid USA, he at first couldn't imagine recounting his liminal experience in a liminoid genre, i.e. a book. Prechtel does not engage Victor Turner's work, but Anzaldúa does. She is fairly adept at employing Turner's concepts to help us understand the plight of oppressed peoples within a society. Such subjects often have little or nothing that validates them to the social status quo. They may be permanently liminized by it. Anzaldúa's own life in the Southwest as a Chicana lesbian was a prolonged liminal phase. How to turn the perpetual or traumatic liminality that oppressed people within the status quo of society undergo to new and more autonomous liminoid genres, i.e. new myths to heal societal oppression, is a key part of Anzaldúa's project. So let us return to her engagement with Turner after introducing Anzaldúa and several of her main ideas. Anzaldúa was born in 1942 in the Valley of Texas and died in 2004 from complications with diabetes. She was a renowned scholar of Chicana theory and queer theory, as well as a multifaceted artist scholar, lesbian feminist, and Chicana poet shamana, in her own words. She received her BA in English, Art, and Secondary Education from Pan American University, and her MA in English and Education from the University of Texas at Austin. Her PhD was awarded posthumously from UC Santa Barbara, and her doctoral dissertation was published just a couple years ago. Her first book, Borderlands, La Frontera, was published in the 80s. She begins this book by giving a concise history of the US-American border in the Southwest, the place where she grew up. It is an open wound where the third world grates against the first and bleeds. The borderland is the lifeblood of two different worlds merging to form a third country, a border culture. Borders are set up to define places that are safe versus unsafe, to distinguish us versus them. A border is a dividing line, a narrow strip along a steep edge. A borderland is a vague and undetermined place created by the emotional residue of an unnatural boundary, and it is in a constant state of transition. In order to understand the US-Mexican border in the American Southwest, Anzaldúa goes on to give a brief history of the conquest. By the 16th century CE, Cortes and the Spanish invade and decimate the indigenous population from over 1,500 million to under 1.5 million pure-blooded Indians. This is also the birth of a new race, the mestizo, people of mixed Indian and Spanish descent, the Chicanos, Mexican Americans, who have immunity to European diseases and inherit the continent. What happened next was that Chicanos explored and settled in parts of the US Southwest, mixing again with native North Americans. All of the Southwest at this time was in Mexico: Texas, California, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, all Mexico. Fast forward to the 1800s when Anglos, or gringos, white Americans, migrate with their doctrine of white superiority and land sovereignty. This leads to the Spanish-American Wars, the Battle of the Alamo, and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. America at this time annexes about half of Mexico, and 100,000 remaining Mexican citizens are annexed by conquest, becoming American citizens overnight. Anzaldúa defines the Chicanx people as the Aztecas of the north, or Ashinabeg people, and she argues they are the single largest population of people with Indian descent in the United States. The annexing of half of Mexico initiates a history of race conflict and land theft, economic imperialism leading up to the present day, a new wave of migration now moving from Mexico to the American Southwest due to economic necessity. And a culture or third closed country of the borderlands emerges, where los atravesados, that is those who are prohibited to cross, and the border police clash, and where Chicanos and other non-white people are oppressed and exploited. For Anzaldúa, los atravesados, or those who cannot cross, are permanently liminalized people. Anzaldúa likens their situation to an old Navajo protection song, quote, "Now among the alien gods with weapons of magic I am." Anzaldúa's own brother, although an American citizen, was rounded up one day when she was a child because he had no papers and didn't speak English, and he walked home from Guadalajara. Jumping ahead to Anzaldúa's chapter most explicitly on mythology, the archetype of the serpent, as well as the Jungian shadow notion, her chapter entering into the serpent can be read as a psychological mythic journey. In Chicana folktale, the serpent is both a symbol of proliferating evil and potential rape. Don't go to the outhouse at night, her mother would tell her, or a serpent will crawl into your nalgas, as well as an indigenous totem spirit. Anzaldúa describes how she overcame her fear of what the serpent had come to represent in her culture and discovered a kinship with the serpent. One day she was in fact bit by a serpent and dreamed that rattler fangs filled her mouth, scales covering her body, and in the morning she saw through the eyes of the snake, felt snake blood coursing through her, and the serpent became mi tono, that is, my totemic or animal counterpart, Anzaldúa becoming forever immune to its venom. The wisdom of the serpent gives Anzaldúa courage to re-envision the myths of her tribe, even and especially as she finds them in herself as limiting beliefs. Quote, "There is a rebel in me, a shadow beast. It is part of me that refuses to take orders from the outside authorities. It refuses also to take orders from my conscious will. It threatens the sovereignty of my rulership. It is that part of me that hates constraints of any kind. At the least hint of limitations, it kicks out, bolts." Throughout this chapter and the next one, Anzaldúa describes the mythical, spiritual, and shamanic roots of her shadow work in terms of Mayan and Aztec religious traditions and symbols, and subsequent configurations of the divine feminine under Christianization. And she finds three basic forms of the divine feminine in Chicana culture: the Lady of Guadalupe, the Virgin or the Nurturing Mother, the Cursed or Screwed Mother, La Chingada, and the Weeping Woman, La Llorona. Above all, Anzaldúa dreams of an earlier Aztec goddess, Coatlicue, or snaky skirts, from which she develops what she calls La Facultad. Writing, "I know things older than Freud, older than gender. She, that's how I think of La Víbora, the snake woman. Like the ancient Olmecs, I know Earth is a coiled serpent. 40 years it's taken me to enter into the serpent, to acknowledge that I have a body, that I am a body, and to assimilate the animal body, the animal soul." It seems that the myths Anzaldúa grew up with involved a folk Catholicism with many pagan elements. For example, La Virgen de Guadalupe is Coatlalopu, herself descended from the earlier Aztec goddess Coatlicue, or serpent skirts. Anzaldúa notes how Azteca Mexicana culture already had driven female deities into the margins, and this process only increased. Tonanzi, or the positive side of the female, is separated out, eventually becoming the chaste virgin and protectress, who becomes the central feminine figure in all Mexican cultures. Guadalupe eventually becoming synonymous with La Virgin Maria by the Catholic Church and with La Cultura Chicana. This leaves Coatlicue, or La Chingada, as the whore, beast, or raped mother who is abandoned, and La Llorona as the mother who seeks her lost children. Like many Indians and Mexicans, Anzaldúa writes, "I did not deem my psychic experiences real. I denied their occurrence and let my inner sense atrophy. I allowed white rationality to tell me that the existence of the other world was mere pagan superstition. Institutionalized religion," she writes, "fears trafficking with the spirit world and stigmatizes it as witchcraft. It fears what Jung calls the shadow, the unsavory aspects of ourselves, but even more, it fears the superhuman, the God in us." For Anzaldúa, voodoo, santeria, shamanism, and other native religions are called cults, and their beliefs are called mythologies. Describing her relationship with La Víbora, or her guardian spirit, she writes that a deep stillness comes over her. I'm aware of my breath and my heartbeat, but nothing else. Time collapses, the body shifts gear, mi cuerpo becoming part of and merging with, disappearing into surroundings. I feel my body's intense focus on and awareness of the snake. I'm seeing it, and it's seeing me. My body sends tendrils of awareness from my solar plexus to the snake's body, and my consciousness flows out along these threads and into La Víbora. My tongue becomes her tongue, testing and tasting the air. When my consciousness flows into the animal, it becomes my vehicle to see, feel, touch, hear, taste, and smell in the underworld or other world. For Anzaldúa, psychoanalysis calls these altered phenomenological realms the unconscious, an abstract concept, the unknown land. For Anzaldúa, these totemic animal spirits are real and imaginal at the same time, and the world they initiate her into is one of perspective and language. The mother of serpents, La Víbora, goes back for Anzaldúa to Coatlicue, an Aztec goddess of sacrifice that she associates with healing trauma. For Anzaldúa, this complex goddess who was so terrifying that she had to be reburied comes to symbolize the shadow beast or dark aspect of the mythical unconscious. What must be both healed and empowered if we are to reckon with the deep spiritual lessons of myth. Coatlicue in Anzaldúa's work thus becomes a symbol of addiction, paralysis, alchemical negrito, and the work being done in this time that is painful and slow. Coatlicue is a monstrous goddess giving life to all and devouring all, a rupture in our everyday consciousness. She is the mother archetype as well, duality, synthesis, and a third perspective beyond duality and involving a new unity. Coatlicue is beauty and horror and the prelude to a crossing. What comes after Coatlicue? Simply that which abides in wholeness, which Anzaldúa calls Coatlicue, that is the moon goddess or Coatlicue's daughter, as a creative process of self-engendering. Anzaldúa concludes on Coatlicue, it is by learning to live with her that we transform living in the Borderlands from a nightmare into a numinous experience. It is always a path state to something else. Blocks, or Coatlicue, or shamanic states, are related for Anzaldúa to her cultural identity and the painful process of confusion she suffers as embedded in a larger creative process of cultural shift. In her chapter, The Path of the Red and the Black Ink, Anzaldúa explores the mythopoetics of shamanism, or what she calls the Coatlicue state, in terms of the role of art. This chapter has been criticized a little bit as involving some indigenous appropriationism, but its basic points are still valuable and interesting. For Anzaldúa, tribal works of art can be works of the moment, such as the mask, or those that exist perpetually in performance, such as the totem pole. The mask is only donned in the context of the liminal phase of ritual, whereas the totem pole stands guard over the community during everyday life as well. Anzaldúa sees art's community function as validating human beings to each other and the world, and criticizes Western aestheticism, especially the idea of art for art's sake. She recommends art as a shamanic state of trafficking in images, that is, in myths which serve a renewing and healing community function. Shamanistic performance and indigenous art did not split the artistic from the functional or art from everyday life. Rather, religious, social, and aesthetic purposes of art were all intertwined. Poets gathered to, quote, play music, dance, sing, read poetry in open-air places, and they were, in every sense, a tree in flower for the community. The artist is thus for Anzaldúa a shapeshifter, nahu, or shaman. That is, a liminal rather than a liminoid genre in Turner's sense. Anzaldúa speaks of the artwork in terms of the mythic presences invoked by it. The work has an identity, it is a who or a what, and contains the presences of persons, incarnations of gods or ancestors, as well as natural and cosmic powers. And sounding a bit like Perctel, she writes, the work manifests the same need as a human being, it needs to be fed. When evoked in rite, the object or event is present, that is, enacted. It is both a physical thing and the power that infuses it. And the artwork for Anzaldúa can thus be defined as metaphysical, in that it spins its energies between the gods and humans, but its task is to move the gods. This type of artwork dedicates itself to managing the universe and its energies, and Anzaldúa says she's not really sure what the artwork is when it is at rest, not in performance. Sounding a bit like Martin Heidegger in his Origin of the Work of Art essay, Anzaldúa writes, a mask may only have the power of presence during a ritual dance, and the rest of the time it may be a mere thing. Some works exist forever invoked, however, always in performance, and this is where Anzaldúa speaks of totem poles as well as cave paintings. Invoked indigenous art is communal and speaks of everyday life. It is dedicated to the validation of humans, that is, it makes us hopeful, happy, secure, but it can have negative effects as well, which propel our search towards validation. That is, towards completion, liminal phase, and ritual passage, as described by Turner. Anzaldúa also critiques ethno- and Eurocentrism in the understanding of art and aesthetics, writing, ethnocentrism is the tyranny of Western aesthetics. An Indian mask in an American museum is transposed into an alien aesthetic system where what is missing is the presence of power invoked in the performance ritual. Modern Western painters have borrowed, copied, or otherwise extrapolated the art of tribal cultures and called it cubism, surrealism, and symbolism. This is very true, So Anzaldúa writes, let's stop importing Greek myths and the Western Cartesian split point of view and root ourselves in the mythological soil and soul of this continent. Modernity can be defined as the rise of the subject-object split and its subsequent tyranny in Western aesthetics. The reconstruction of the ancient world promoted by modernity tends to go back to Greco-Roman or Judeo-Christian myth. Anzaldúa daringly asks if we might not have the courage for a fundamental reorientation which opens up and takes seriously the myths from around here. In some of the more insulting and controversial passages in this chapter, she critiques white American aesthetics in particular, writing, instead of surreptitiously ripping off the vital energy of POCs and putting it to commercial use, whites could allow themselves to share and exchange and learn from us in respectful ways. By taking up curanderismos, santeria, shamanism, Taoism, Zen, and otherwise delving into the spiritual life and ceremonies of multicolored peoples, Anglos would perhaps lose the white sterility they have in their kitchens, bathrooms, hospitals, mortuaries, and missile bases. This is a bit of a startling recommendation to a sort of generalized New Age appropriation of POC cultures, but it is understandable in light of the 60s, 70s, and 80s America in which Anzaldúa grew up. I think recommendations like this will have a lot of value today as useful correctives, even if they have had some unfortunate consequences in contemporary New Age communities, very often fusing the cultures of traditional peoples into an unrooted New Age hodgepodge. Anzaldúa's later phase of work can be characterized as frustration at the lack of receptivity to, in her earlier works, the deeper themes of feminist spirituality. Borderlands La Frontera was mostly read as about hybridic or intersectional identity. In a short piece, Metaphors in the Tradition of the Shaman, she writes, in Borderlands, I articulated the debilitating state that women and colonized peoples go through and the resulting disempowerment. It is not easy to get out of these states. If we are lucky, we create, like the shaman, images that induce altered state of consciousness, conducive to self-healing. Posthumously published dissertation can then be read as an aesthetic and ethical artwork outlining an epistemic and ontological self-healing process. Its guiding idea is that of the Coelquaqui imperative. Coelquaqui, who you can see in the upper right here, was the daughter of Coatlicue. For Anzaldúa, she symbolizes a struggle to reconstruct oneself and heal the sustos resulting from wounding, trauma, racism, and other acts of violation that shatter the soul. Anzaldúa notes that she finds people using metaphors such as Borderlands in a more limited sense than she had intended. So now she intends to expand on psychic and emotional Borderlands by using the term Nepantla. Most readings of Borderlands focus on the border people, or the atravesados, in the liminal phase, and in terms of a geopolitics. Anzaldúa wants her readers to become more aware of the spiritual healing of this psychic condition and social situation by pointing to Nepantleras, that is, to the positive features of what Turner had called liminal personae. Nepantleras are those more or less perpetually involved in Nepantla, which Anzaldúa defines as the psychic space of the in-between or spirit world, never fully belonging to any location. Nepantleras, those between worlds and in multiple worlds, shuttle in liminal perspectives and decolonize reality by producing liminoid genres. Here you see Inés Rodriguez's famous painting, Nepantla, to symbolize this psychic state. Note the two worlds on the left and the right, the magic carpet, the military yet relaxed posture, the mysterious identity of the Nepantlera, the clock or time and history of the world, as well as the rooster, symbolizing both death and healing and rebirth. Nepantla, like Coatlicue, is an Aztec mythical figure, usually associated with the transition to death and the other world. Lastly, this week we're going to give a closer reading of Chapter 2 of Anzaldúa's book Light in the Dark, Rewriting Spirituality, Identity, Reality, the chapter titled Flights of the Imagination. This chapter is Anzaldúa's most sustained discussion of the imagination as an epistemological political tool, and it's the most direct statement of her metaphysical framework. For Anzaldúa, the Coelquaqui process or imperative is mythical, involving a shamanic initiatory dismemberment, but the imagination's role is that of creating and sustaining new realities from Nepantla. In this chapter, Anzaldúa draws on curanderismos, shamanismos, shamanism, transpersonal psychology, anthropology, fiction, as well as childhood experiences. Philosophically, she valorizes subaltern ontologies involving multiple interlayered worlds which we discover and co-create. She calls this spiritual activism as an embodied praxis that requires us to learn what she calls the Nepantla body. So what is shamanism? Why shamanism? Why is it just coming up now in our survey of the history of world myth? The term shamanism, you may or may not know, is an invention of Western anthropologists. The word shaman originated with the Tungus tribe in Siberia. The term is generally used to describe one who sees in the dark and has the ability to see with the strong eye, or to travel to the hidden spirit worlds to find information and to perform acts that will heal a person or a community. Anzaldúa's task is to envision Quoquaqui not dead or decapitated, but with eyes wide open. Our task is to light up the darkness. Anzaldúa's task is a shamanic one by her own self-description. Is this cultural appropriation? Let's investigate. The breakthrough work for neo-shamanism and the contemporary academic and non-academic discussion of shamanistic phenomena is clearly Mircea Eliade's Shamanism, Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy. Since the publication of this book, shamanism has become a runaway anthropological construct and has also developed a troubling legacy in popular culture. At the same time, it is a term that has developed a life of its own in various fields. In the cross-cultural sense, a shaman is one who traffics with the spirit world, and whose life work interfaces these non-ordinary realities with consensual realities in the context of healing practices. For better and worse, the word has acquired this cross-cultural point of reference. The world's leading expert on Anzaldúa, a close personal friend of hers as well as her literary executor after her death, writes on Anzaldúa's use of the term shamanism. Because it originates in anthropology's interaction with indigenous peoples, many readers might view Anzaldúa's incorporation of shamanic worldviews as an act of appropriation that romanticizes a homogeneous indigenous past, downplays the specificity of contemporary indigenous peoples, and oversimplifies or ignores questions of land sovereignty. Keating notes that, to be sure, in her early work, Anzaldúa sometimes relied on stereotyped thinking about indigenous peoples. While it's important to address these oversimplifications, it's also important to locate them chronologically in the trajectory of her career and acknowledge her intellectual development and later more nuanced response. Anzaldúa feels justified in invoking the tradition of Shamaneria or Nagualismos. Anzaldúa writes, a type of Mesoamerican supernaturalism, Nagualismos is an alternative epistemology and a folk theory of knowledge. Its basic assumption or worldview is shapeshifting, the ability to become animal or something else, as well as traveling into other realities. These journeys require a different type of seeing, the ability to perceive the world in a different way, a perceptual experience of what Carlos Castaneda had called non-ordinary reality. Unlike Purtell, Anzaldúa seems less aware of the problematic nature of drawing on Castaneda's legacy, frequently quoting Castaneda's lead character Don Juan in this chapter on the practice of a deeper sort of spiritual seeing, what she had earlier called la facultad. Unfortunate indebtedness to Carlos Castaneda's literary legacy aside, Anzaldúa is certainly not the only major theorist to think we should give Castaneda a second look. In any case, what she goes on to describe in this chapter constitutes a helpful summary of the Tree of Life motif, El Árbol de la Vida, which we have seen developed across the course, from Inanna's Hulupu tree through Isis's and Osiris's Erica tree, into the biblical two trees in Genesis 2, the Australian tree of the rainbow serpent and the ancestors, as well as the Mayan tree in the underworld in which the head of Wunhunappu is enclosed. Not to mention Yggdrasil or the Norse tree, and the list could go on and on. The world tree or tree of life motif as an anima mundi is indeed one of the most pervasive and persistent themes in all world mythology. Anzaldúa relates to it initially in terms of the tale of the Virgin's tree. I've been developing an ongoing relationship with the spirit of trees and nature sites since I was a child, and I can alter my consciousness in order to communicate with them. What Anzaldúa learns from the spirit of trees is that the universe is conscious and that spirits and souls communicate by sending subtle signals to those who pay attention. Finding a particularly beautiful tree in her walks around Santa Cruz, Anzaldúa believes she can see the image La Virgen de Guadalupe in the tree. She asks the tree for inspiration. I ask it to help me imagine and open to El Cenote, that is the underground well of memory and shamanic images, and find a frame for this essay she's writing. The chapter Flights of the Imagination indeed provides Anzaldúa's most philosophical statement of the shamanic worldview, though it is interesting that the essay begins with and is organized by the idea of the cosmic tree. For Anzaldúa, the tree is a link between worlds. The cosmic tree connects under, middle, and upper worlds, just as she'll connect her essay's sections. From the roots to the ground, and up to its trunk to its branches and on to the sky, the tree is a journey from the depths of the underworld that ascends into the concrete physical world and then into the upper realities of spirits, a constant descent and ascent movement, where there is ultimately no above and no below. She's not sure whether the Titlayan, the hereafter or the other world, is represented by the top or the bottom of the tree. Like in comparative Indo-European poetics, Anzaldúa's tree is tripartite, chthonic or underworld element representing the earth's energies, its roots, animal spirits, the serpent, and the dead who have not moved on to the next level of existence. In this realm, the soul is knowledge of the seasons, weather, animal and plant life, the dead, as well as healing techniques for illness and disease. The middle or liminal part of the tree is the physical plane in which we live our lives and is symbolized by the trunk. It is the realm of the planet and the outer reaches of the universe. Journeying to the middle can show La Chamana, ordinary reality's actual conditions and their spiritual aspects. The upper or Uranian sky-like part of the tree is the branches. The upper world above the sky is the world of incorporeal energies, spirits who are gods and goddesses, the spirits of the dead who have progressed beyond the land of the dead. On the right there you see Carl Jung's own depiction of the cosmic tree, as well as Hillman's description of it as the mythological way to describe a psychological cosmos. The common mythological core of all three levels or stages of the cosmic tree is for Anzaldúa her concept of Nepantla. Nepantla is liminal with respect to lower, middle, upper, or any other point of distinction or dialectics. Not only is Nepantla liminal, but it is the connective tissue between the three layers of the cosmic tree and between the conscious and the unconscious dimensions of the human psychic experience. Anzaldúa writes regarding Nepantla, perceiving something from two different angles creates a split in awareness that can lead to the ability to control perception, to balance contemporary society's worldview with non-ordinary worldviews, and to move between them to a space that simultaneously exists and does not exist. I call entering this realm Nepantla, a Nahuatl word for an in-between space, el lugar entre medio, the place in between. Nepantla for Anzaldúa is importantly a palabra indígena, an indigenous word, and a concept that refers to a place that is no place, i.e. what we earlier in this lecture called the liminal as such. Nepantla is also the connective tissue, or bridge between compartments of the self. This is where Anzaldúa most explicitly engages the work of Victor Turner as well as Edith Turner, pointing to the murals of Teotihuacan, in which Nepantla is represented as the afterlife. She writes, "My concept of Nepantla is similar to Victor Turner's liminal space. Turner modified Van Gennep's concept of liminality to describe a zone of impetuous transition, the point of contact between the worlds of nature and spirit, between humans and the numinous or divine. The liminal space facilitates the bridging and joining of these worlds through ritual transformation." Interestingly, Anzaldúa owes an even greater debt to Edith Turner in this chapter than to Victor Turner. Edith Turner she characterizes as one of those rare anthropologists who define spirits not as metaphor or symbol thinking, but as actual realities. To think otherwise is intellectual imperialism. The error of thinking in metaphors for Anzaldúa is that it distorts the reality of the spirit world. That reality is Nepantla, from which Anzaldúa writes. The later Anzaldúa dares to claim that what Western philosophy has tended to regard as merely mythical entities, gods, daimons, shamanic journeyings attested in indigenous worldviews and Western esoterica, are perfectly real. She embraces the ontological belief in the existence of things outside the body, exosomatic, as opposed to the belief that material reality is a projection of merely mentally created images. This commits her to the task of articulating a metaphysics of interconnectedness to explain what the spirit world revealed from Nepantla is, as well as an epistemically informed psychology of the imagination to account for how we know it. Situating her work within the reality of the spirit world, rejected by the trend of Western reason towards epistemic limitation, her path of Conocimiento, a Spanish word meaning knowledge, or wisdom is not grounded in Western epistemologies, but in Indigenous panpsychism. Imagination's soul dimensions bridge body and nature to spirit and mind, making these connections in the in-between space of Nepantla. Because the Enlightenment-based reality we have inherited is too restrictive, it prevents us from enacting or envisioning the radical social change we need. Anzaldúa decolonizes this dominant ontology, drawing from alternative traditions and developing a more expansive philosophy, embracing spirit, indigenous wisdom, alchemy, mythic figures, ancestral guides, and more. So in a way, Nepantla is the key to Anzaldúa's theory of myth and provides a kind of method. To explore Nepantla, she writes, must redefine the imagination, not as a marginal non-reality, nor as an altered state, but rather as another type of reality. What Nepantla is as the in-between space, or an indigenous word that refers to a place that is no place, can be defined philosophically for Anzaldúa in 3 points. Nepantla is the transcendental imagination, as well as the abyssal body, in which we have our psychic home. Nepantla is the interface between materiality and immateriality. Where the material and the immaterial invisible idea collide, we have the mundus imaginalis, and Nepantla is both ordinary mortal experience as well as an extraordinary divine event, all come together in Anzaldúa's Nepantla concept as a point of contact and a bridge between different worlds. Anna Louise Keating sums up the core concepts of Anzaldúa's philosophy as follows. She says that Anzaldúa presents poet shamanic aesthetics involving certain key concepts, such as El Mundo Zerdo, the left-handed world, El Cenote, the source, Nepantla, Nepantleras, liminality and liminal beings, Conocimiento, knowing, La Facultad, Coalquaqui, imperative, that is shamanic dismemberment, aesthetic drive to wholeness, and the Coatlique state, understood as the cathexis and catharsis of trauma. Anzaldúa's use of the creative imagination in her concept of Nepantla goes back to Henry Corbin's book Mundus Imaginalis. There, in Anzaldúa, the distinction is drawn between the literal and the psychic, the perceptual and the imaginal, between literal and psychic truth, just as between perceptual and imaginal reality. There is a zone of indistinction or sphere of undecidability. Corbin calls this the mundus imaginalis, and like Mahoney understands it as the source of myth. Anzaldúa is interested in a particular kind of knowledge, or episteme, which she calls conocimiento. Conocimiento is knowing as well as wisdom, and it emerges for Anzaldúa from Nepantla as that mediating in-between in which material forces and immaterial images collide, creating remolinos, or vortices. From within these vortices, the psyche wrests transformative insight, conocimiento. Knowing is, according to her account, neither simply perceptual nor merely imaginal, neither a simple matter of fact nor abstract speculation, but knowing includes scientific and humanist knowing about phenomena, just as it includes the act of imagining or dreaming while awake and sueños along with the phenomena. Conocimiento is thus for Anzaldúa similar to the dream or fantasy process, resembling the magical flight of journeying shamans. The project here is to use the findings of imaginal and transpersonal psychology in order to take another look at folk epistemologies like Nagualismos. Anzaldúa vindicates these folk epistemologies and indigenous worldviews, which are rooted in spiritual belief and magical thinking, since their active imagining or waking dreams and the gestures of the body they engage, she takes to be real psychocosmic structures, i.e. imaginal structures that link us back to El Cenote, the source, via the individual and the collective Árbol de la Vida, the tree of life. Anzaldúa thus develops an epistemology of the imagination within a psychology of the image. Her project is at root in this chapter a new indigenous metaphysics of our world-making capacities. Why do we need a dual vision? Why do we need Nepantla as a basis for our existentials education? Because each reality is only a description, a system of perception and language. When you learn to access other realities, you undo one description of plain level of reality and construct others. You learn a new language and a new way of viewing the world, and you bring this magical knowledge and apply it to the everyday world. According to Don Juan, you must stop the world before you can apprehend a separate reality. You learned that your former descriptions and frameworks were inadequate, and henceforth you see the world with a new set of eyes, a dual vision. In sum, Nepantla, although a mythic concept, explains everything for Anzaldúa and has a properly philosophical role to play in her ontology. Looking over all the passages in which she defines and describes or writes from Nepantla, Nepantla ends up being almost everything. There is the Nepantla body, the Nepantla brain, the Nepantla perspective. Imagination, psyche, mind, and spirit are all described in terms of Nepantla. Nepantla is a state of affairs in the world as well as their incorporeal truth. Nepantla is the material or maternal substrate of our existence, matter or nature, as well as the ritual interval in which we realize it. Nepantla is both this-worldly and otherworldly. It's for Anzaldúa the place-space of any given spirit or faculty, la facultad. Nepantla is anterior to the lower, middle, and upper world distinctions of the cosmic tree. Nepantla is both a liminal suspension and a liminoid chiasmus or creativity. Nepantla is the interaction of nature, spirit, and humans and gods, and it is a place, no place, existence, non-existence. It is being and nothingness. And if this wasn't enough, Anzaldúa goes on, Nepantla is also compositional and decompositional states. Nepantla engirds our unconscious, subconscious, and conscious layers. Nepantla is a connective tissue, bridge, or point of contact, threshold between the worlds. Nepantla can also be a trip or a journey, being on a Nepantla, involving orientation and disorientation, blockage, as well as creativity, coetlique and coaqui. Nepantla is an indigenous notion and it decolonizes reality. Nepantla is the condition of possibility for human rootedness as well as rhizomes, the way that mycorrhizal soul structures proliferate, as do fungi, and Nepantla is the condition of possibility for soul-making as well as for reclaiming a lived onto epistemology or theory of reality within a more rooted indigenous theory of knowledge. Nepantla is basically the unground, the urground or primordial ground, as well as the everyday ground for knowledge, wisdom, conocimiento as such. More simply, and in conclusion, Nepantla can be defined for Anzaldúa as an access hub to the spirit world. She writes, "We are bonded to this planet in ways we don't even imagine. We are in a partnership with the earth, but the partnership must go both ways. We must demonstrate trust, love, respect, and reciprocity to make this bond work, a human yearning and an essential human need to witness the flow of life and the patterns manifested in life. The spiritual is a deep sense of belonging and participation in life."